Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my video covering the Avatar kind of video YouTuber project for Legendary Masters. This is a video project I was contacted about to participate in to celebrate the 15-year anniversary of the start of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Basically the start of the entire Avatar franchise. So I'll of course have another video where I just cover the typical kind of anniversary thoughts of my experience in the fandom and stuff like that, but this project is a more kind of focused approach to doing that. So what is the project? Why is it called For Legendary Masters? What's it about? The idea is that if you were chosen to be the next Avatar, who would you pick to be your 4 masters? One for each element. Who would be your master? Who would be your Airbending master, Waterbending master, Earthbending master, Firebending master, so on. And yeah, it's a really interesting project to celebrate the whole kind of history of the franchise by just selecting characters from all across the universe. ATLA, Korra, the comics, the Kyoshi novel, anything that's canon basically. Who would be your masters? So very, very fun idea. And the idea is that you guys are meant to participate in this as well. I think a bunch of kind of well-known Avatar YouTubers are starting it off with videos that will be released immediately, and then the idea is that we turn it over to you. You also make your video under the kind of the heading For Legendary Masters, give it your own title, like I titled mine Team Prime, and you tell me who your masters were going to be. But let's have this discussion here. Who do I pick to be my masters? So let's start off with Earthbending. So who would be my Earthbending master? So who are the obvious candidates to start off with? So immediately you have the likes of Toph and sort of her family. So Toph, Lin, Suyin. From like Suyin you go into sort of like Wei Wing, I suppose Kuvira you'd bring in there as well. And there's a lot of very skilled earthbenders in there. But this is where, like, because you're doing this as your masters, you have to think about personalities and how they'd interact and stuff like that. And so I tend to lean away from Toph just because we've seen the way how she is as a teacher, and she has her own struggles with it, and her general approaches of being a teacher isn't the best, and I don't think I'd react particularly well to her approach as a teacher. So I think that sort of eliminates Toph for the most part. As much as she is absolutely like fan favorite character and pretty much the best earthbender in the series, I think her teaching approach is kind of what, for me, eliminates her from contention for me. You have other kind of noted earthbenders in that, like, okay, Long Feng is worth talking about at least for a little bit, but maybe not. You've got John Zhu from the Kyoshi novel. He, I think, is absolutely worth a look at if you want a kind of different perspective, if you want to have that villain on your team, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And you also have Lao Ji, or Tigui the Immortal, whatever name you want to refer to him by. We actually know a lot of pretty good earthbending masters, but my choice is going to be King Bumi. The King of Amashu, the Mad Genius, whatever name you want to call him by. He's my pick. And it's because I wanted an earthbending master who was sort of really represented, like, standard earthbending taken to its sort of maximum. So I think King Bumi really represents that, whereas Toph has her unique style, the whole praying mantis style, to counteract her blindness and use her seismic sense to her advantage, her connection to her earth to advantage. Bumi represents just, I think, standard earthbending taken to as far as it can go. He is the best practitioner of like standard earthbending we've ever seen. But I think he takes it to a sort of level beyond that because he has his unique personality. He's a mad genius. And so he adds that little bit of extra creativity into earthbending, which I think helps to counteract the typical, stable, survival, just, locked in style of earthbending. he adds that bit of creativity to it that we see. Like when he takes back Omashu, just those fun little touches that he doesn't need to add in, but they help to just present something different about earthbending. Similarly with stuff like, he falls backwards into the ground and suddenly like disappears and reappears somewhere. That's really, fun and clever stuff. So I like that he represents that idea of like, as a master, he knows the standard stuff to its absolute maximum, but has gone a little bit further and has that little bit of a unique edge to what he has to show us, and stuff like the creeping crystal, his fun personality. I think he'd be a very fun teacher, and I'm kind of, as we go forward with the picks, we have to acknowledge that we have a very sort of wild, sort of maybe oddball character on our team. So we're going to have to sort of even that out as we go through the other elements with some more solid, stable teachers. But I think for Earthbending, that's what I wanted. I didn't want the kind of maybe slightly aggressive, shouty approach of Toph, but we also didn't want maybe the boring approach of someone like a Roku's Earthbending teacher, Sood. So King Bumi as my Earthbending teacher is my first pick. That moves us on to Firebending. And with Firebending, we've got a lot of choices here, but I think there's one very obvious choice who I think a lot of people are going to pick, and it's an absolutely worthwhile pick, and that is Iroh. He's not who I'm going to choose, but I will talk about him here of just like, in so many ways, like I can see so many people just immediately locking Iroh in as their Firebending teacher, and he is that center point around which you build your Avatar team around, because the amount that he offers you in terms of his knowledge of just firebending, the experience that he has with like the dragons, the sun warriors, the fact that he invents lightning redirection, he knows lightning generation, he's a leader of like the Order of the White Lotus. All these things, like his knowledge of the other elements and their philosophies, like that makes him like a perfect fit. But just so I'm not doing the really obvious choices, I wanted to choose someone different. And I think there is a character out there in terms of firebending who kind of fits kind of well with, I suppose, my kind of, if I was learning firebending, how I'd want to be thought it, given that it's the most dangerous in a way of the elements to learn, as we saw when Aang tried to learn from this character. So my pick for my firebending master is going to be Zhang Zhizhong, the other firebending master that is in the Order of the White Lotus. I think he'll be mentioned by, I think, a bunch of people as we go through this, but maybe dismissed because of his own approach to firebending, of having a very negative view. Admittedly, a lot of that negativity I do think comes from what happened with Zhao, and then Aang maybe showed a little bit of just, over-exuberance in terms of wanting to go advance too quickly at firebending. Whereas I don't think myself I would have that approach, and I would personally as well be pretty cautious with firebending and want to take it slow, go through all those breathing steps and stuff like that before you get into actually using the fire. So I think his approach to teaching firebending would actually be kind of perfect for me, where the firebending philosophy would be probably the most opposite to myself. So I think his style works for me, of like being cautious, being hyper aware of the dangers of firebending and not having control. So Zhang Zhang as a character represents kind of control above all else. I think that's what's very clear about his firebending. We don't really see him doing like what a lot of the other firebenders do, and just doing the fire fist, just like streams of fire, sending it out like that. Instead, he focuses more on creating like contained walls or blocks of fire, and he has a more defensive, controlling style. And I think that's a really cool and unique thing that he has going for him, that really separates him from Iroh, that he does do the walls. Like we saw that in the Deserter episode, and then later on during Sozin's Comet, we saw him just making huge walls and just clearing paths through the streets. He was very impactful during that battle. And I think that style works very, very well, of just, here is someone who is so aware of the dangers of firebending that like he's almost built his style around making it so that it's as much in control as possible. And I love that emphasis on just the idea of like creating more of a shape to your firebending, rather than just doing a big fire fist and sending a big stream or ball of fire out. You kind of create more like a wall shape, and there's more control to it. A different type of control than, say, in Azula, but control nonetheless. So that's why I choose Zhang Zhizhong as a more sort of interesting pick. And again, he sort of counters Bumi in that you have a very wild, kind of mad genius style teacher, and now with Zhang Zhizhong you have a more strict, in control teacher. So it feels sort of balanced in terms of the overall approach so far in my picks. And of course with fire, there's lots of other options as well. You could go for Zuko, you could go for Iroh 2 from Korra. I suppose there's some value in maybe a Pali if you kind of value her skills, or if you really see yourself as an avatar as having combustion bending, or any of those special techniques. There's value there. Heiran from the Kyoshi novel is kind of a new master we know about. And of course, like another avatar, like Roku or something like that would be another good pick. But I choose Zhang Zhizhong. Next up is airbending. My airbending master is going to be Aang. I'm not going to kind of mince words here and like mulling it over. You guys probably knew that was going to be the case. Aang is my favorite character. I've made that very clear over the years on my channel. I kind of had to choose him. He's going to be my kind of boring pick, my obvious pick. Whereas I've gone for a little bit different picks in the other categories, but I had to go for Aang here. You do have other options though here, in that I think Tenzin is a worthy choice if you want to go for him, as maybe showing off more of what we see as being a master airbender. But again, does his teaching style, as we saw it took a while for him to evolve his teaching style to be sort of what we expect it to be. You have Monk Gyatso, and I think the only thing that might hold Monk Gyatso back is that I do feel a lot of the most interesting information about Gyatso comes from the Avatar trading card game, which not a lot of fans are particularly familiar with, so they might not know about some of his most interesting feats during the Air Nomad genocide. But he's definitely an option in terms of the guy who trained Aang. He, again, was kind of like, he had a slightly different approach than the other kind of monks, head monks at the temple. And there was like a hint that like he may have been Order of White Lotus or sort of linked it with them in some way. So he's an interesting character if you wanted to go for him. Zahir is an option, though I don't really rate him that highly in terms of like, you know, I don't think he's actually going to be teaching you proper airbending necessarily, but I could see some value to it if you value his like spirituality and philosophy more so than the direct physical art of learning airbending. You've got, you know, Guru Lahima, though we don't know a lot about him, but there's an option if you wanted to go down that path. Kelsang from the Kyoshi novel, he's definitely now an option. Offiko from the trading card game, there's some value to, but again, you'd probably always go for Gyatso over Offiko. So, you know, that Jinora, as if you needed a very spiritual character but didn't want to use airbending more offensively, you'd maybe go for her. But I chose Aang, as I already mentioned, and I think he works because, look, he prior to Jinora, the youngest ever master airbender, the youngest ever to get his tattoos, we saw just how skilled he is, even just as an airbender, without even using the other elements. How he was able to, in some of those fights, kind of almost run rings around Zuko and the other Fire Nation kind of soldiers there, just really highlighting the style and uniqueness of airbending. His kind of sparring match with King Bumi really helped to emphasize sort of the creativity, the speed. Aang so much just represents airbending at its like full maximum of like every aspect of it coming together. And he's a creative character, he's fun, he invented the air scooter, and he also, you know, has the ability to go into more of the airbending power moves if he needs to. The only maybe slight debate here is that we maybe haven't seen Aang at his absolute best. We've never seen Aang in his full-on prime, because even in the comics right now, he's just getting there, and we haven't yet seen him in like his 20s or 30s when he'd probably be at his best. And that's why I'd say that like Tenzin probably more represents closer to what Aang is like at his maximum than maybe where he is right now. So I do believe though that Aang is like incredible when he's at his prime. And I think there's value to that because I think obviously he trains Tenzin to be that good. So there's proof that he is actually a good teacher. Um, and just as someone who, you know, had to deal with being the last airbender and like transferring that knowledge on to his son, the only other person who had airbending, I think he would be very devoted to teaching anyone how to airbend to keep the tradition going on. So I think there's lots of value there. Plus, just in terms of like discussing this as a thing, like I think there is a lot of value to choosing on your team somewhere in your lineup a previous avatar to have on your team, just as someone to go to get a different perspective on even one of the other elements, not just air, which Aang would be focusing on. And then he'd be your sort of guide as someone who is familiar with the experience of being the avatar. Like, of course, you obviously have the past lives and stuff like that, but I think there's a lot of value to having Aang there in front of you, directly teaching you and be able to talk to you at all points instead of having to sort of maybe meditate and talk to them that way. So the spirituality, just the experience from also being an avatar, that's valuable as well, in addition to how sort of prodigal, skilled he was. Plus his personality is more on the kind of fun-loving side, while not being as like crazy as Boomy, but like it leans our sort of masters so far in that direction, sort of 2-to-1 in terms of fun versus strictness, but we'll sort of attempt to match that with our last pick. So we move on to waterbending now, and this is going to be a very interesting one to see what other people choose, because I think Katara is going to be the obvious choice for so many people because she's definitely, you know, pretty much one of the best waterbenders that we've seen. She is familiar with like basically all the different styles of waterbending. She's encountered pretty much all of the unique abilities or techniques of waterbending, in that like she's a healer, she knows northern style, southern style, she's seen foggy swamp style, she knows about blood bending, you know, she touches all of the aspects that you'd want, and we've seen that she is actually a good teacher. So, you know, kind of like Iroh, she is that sort of perfect option, but is she necessarily what I need to round off my team? And while I'd love to choose Katara, if I'd done my list slightly differently, I probably would choose Katara. But I think I need someone different as a waterbending teacher. So then you look, okay, beyond Katara, who are the best waterbenders? I think you obviously have to sort of almost exclude, in a way, Amon, Tarlok, and Yukon, just because their abilities are almost so focused on their unique sort of bloodline ability of the psychic bloodbending, and you can't just assume that you as the avatar would have that. And while we've seen, say, Tarlok and Amon use normal waterbending, have we seen it to enough to demonstrate that they're masters on the level of a Katara? I'm not quite sure. I think Tarlok definitely showcased how impressive he is as a waterbender, and you can assume Amon is probably better than him just because Tarlok was, character-wise, got across as the weaker of the two. So Amon is presented as being, you know, realistically an incredible waterbender, but we just didn't get to see it. So, but again, because they're focused so much on their abilities, it's maybe not the exact path to go down. So I think you almost have to exclude them. After those, who's left as the best waterbending teachers? And you're like, okay, Paku, the waterbending master, is he the choice? And then after that, you're like, okay, Minghua. But then you're like, Oona Locke, he's out there as well. And I think he is in that upper echelon of master waterbenders based on what we've seen. I think beyond that, you're probably talking about the other waterbending avatars like Korra and Karuk. But just in terms of their waterbending, are they better than anyone else? And that Karuk almost feels like he's a Tonrok, almost like very similar to Tonrok's style. But maybe even better. But again, just because we know so little, like, is that enough? Would his personality, would he be the best teacher? Perhaps not based on what we know so far. Tonrok isn't as good as his brother, as we saw, so you maybe have to eliminate him. Korra, you know, may not be the best, you know, teacher. Waterbending may not even be her best element, you know. There's those type of things. Kirima from the Kyoshi novel is an option. But I think the pick I'm going to go for is Oona Locke for multiple reasons. I think you have to acknowledge how skilled he is. I think you can't deny he, like, excluding the psychic bloodbenders as being like this separate list of powerful waterbenders. I think you're talking about like Katara, Oona Locke, and Paku as being like your three master sort of standard waterbenders, and I think I would probably place Oona Locke ahead of Paku. So it's more of like a debate between Katara and Oona Locke for like who's the best, sort of standard waterbender. And I think you have to give Oona Locke so much credit for like just the fights that he's involved in, how skilled he is. Like he's able to like best like Mako and Bolin, kind of like an amazing bending tag team that managed to take down like Minghua and Gazan. He took them down. That was incredibly impressive. He showcased, be able to fight the Avatar, and defeating his brother as well was an excellent display of like, I suppose, that difference between being like a master waterbender and being kind of that level above. That level above and kind of showing you that you're like that elite level waterbender, and I think he has that. He has this sort of uniqueness to his style where there's like a slyness, a subtlety to what he does that feels on that level of like some of the stuff that maybe Long Feng does, that John Zhu on the Earthbending side of things does, of just that that kind of creativity that, like, because he's a villain, he's willing to kind of push the limits on what he can do, and he has more of those sort of finishing moves in him. I think he'd be a very, very good kind of waterbending master to have from that power level, what he could teach you, but then also the other side of things is that like he's incredibly spiritual. So of course we have Aang on our team as a sort of spiritual master. Then the two other White Lotus members will help with that. But then having Oona Locke there also to add that kind of different perspective, someone who almost presents the spirits before humans perspective. That's the approach that Oona Locke represents above everything. That's definitely worth having, in that like Korra learned so much from Oona Locke, even if maybe some of it was like a bit of an act. It did help Korra, though. Korra learned to be spiritual in part because of Oona Locke, teaching her that spirit bending technique, which is very unique, and I think that would be a very cool thing to learn from him. And that's another value to having him as a teacher. And then I think probably most importantly, one of the things I'm really valuing Oona Locke for is that different perspective that he helped sort of unlock within Korra. That idea that Wan was correct in terms of closing the portals in his time. There needed to be a separation. But does that need to be the same way forever? Why not change that? That if not for Oona Locke, I don't think Korra would have considered opening the portals and making that decision that she did. And that's just what I think he's going to offer. Like he's probably going to say some things that like you would disagree with him over and would maybe side with the other three masters over him. But I think he would say a few things that maybe he would be the lone member of the four saying that you would agree with. So I think there's a lot of value to having that different perspective, almost like including that one villain among your four masters. And that's why I'm valuing Oona Locke quite highly here, just for his, that sort of that tricky master of waterbending, that who's more skilled than you think he is. The wisdom of like he's a previous like leader of the Red Lotus, so that's that different perspective than the Order of the White Lotus, the different forms of wisdom type thing. And then the spirituality especially is going to be very, very important from him. Plus, he offers you the ability to learn that spirit bending technique, which you're pretty much not going to learn from anyone else unless you include Korra in your team. So, that's my four. That's my team. So here is a graphic I put together to, again, just show the team all together. So, again, Boomy for Earth, with the few points emphasized here. Powerful and unique earthbending master. Mad genius personality will offset the typical steady and stable style of earthbending. He's a member of the Order of the White Lotus, which I think is valuable, especially because he's one of those kind of like original members and not the kind of Korra, the change in the White Lotus. Master of Jings is an interesting point as well. Neutral Jing especially, that's what he really emphasized when he took back Omashu. Toph's only real rival, I think, for the title of Greatest Earthbender, so that's an interesting point in terms of his power level. So that's why I choose Bumi for Earthbending. For Fire, we have Zhang Zhizhong, and what I like about him is that a more cautious and defensive Firebender, unique style focusing more on control and creating walls of fire, which I really appreciate in terms of when it comes to any sort of thing like that. I really do like to emphasize kind of defense above offense, so I like that complete contrast in a way with him compared to usual Firebending. Again, he is also an Order of the White Lotus member, so he is wise and strong. And then a stricter teacher compared to Aang and Bumi to counter their kind of approach. So that's good to have, I think, as well. As well as him, I suppose, being kind of, along with Bumi, one of the older members, but like older members of the team with a stricter approach, because Bumi still almost like acts kid-like in some ways, but that's what's fun about him. For Airbending, again, we have Aang, master airbender since he was 12, creativity and fun integrated into his style. His perspective as an avatar offers a lot to the team in terms of understanding the role and spirituality, and also he's my favorite character in the franchise. So he's my sort of, main character, kind of obvious pick. He represents everything about airbending that I'd want to know, so it has to be him. And then just the fact that he is a previous avatar adds so much extra to what he can offer. And they're probably my surprise choice out of them all, though if you're really familiar with my content, is it that much of a surprise? For Waterbending, I went with Oona Locke. And we have to emphasize here, an incredibly skilled master waterbender with a sly and subtle style. One of the most spiritual characters we have seen, given that he invented the spirit bending technique. He'll offer a unique perspective compared to the other masters on the team, because he is that, comes from that Red Lotus background rather than the others having the sort of Order of the White Lotus background. Because he's a villain, that'll be very different than like Aang and so on. And he just in terms of his attitude and stuff like that, his general approach, he'll have a more neutral attitude as a teacher. He won't be obviously as like fun or anything like that as Bumi or Aang, but he also won't be as strict as Zhang Zhizhong. He'll be very sort of middle of the road. We saw the way he sort of was teacher to Korra. He was just sort of very neutral, sort of treated her roughly like an equal. And once you don't allow yourself to get overly manipulated, he'll be relatively, okay to deal with. So I think that's a really nice blend on all accounts for my team. So that is Team Prime here. So I suppose to just round off the video, I have to turn it over to you guys. You should also attempt to take part in 4 Legendary Masters. And if you have a YouTube channel, I would urge you to make your own video discussing who your own 4 bending masters would be, or just post on social media or in the comments of this video, anything like that, with your picks and your explanations, and just, spread the word about this kind of video project to try and get it off the ground. It'd be really cool to see so many Avatar fans, making their own 4 Legendary Masters video. That would be very, very cool to see. But like I said, I'll have another video talking more about just kind of generally about the 15th anniversary and kind of my history with the franchise and stuff like that. But this was just a very cool project to ask to be involved in kind of early on. So yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.